All right, good evening, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about and examining the 1967 Newark Rebellion and why it still matters today and how it affects our society, just obviously not only in Newark, but all across the United States. Newark is often remembered to be filled with a lot of violence in the late 1960s, early 70s, but that idea pretty much ignores a lot of the deeper causes behind the uprising of that violence. And so our argument is going to be that the Newark Rebellion was not a spontaneous riot. Instead, it was a result of many decades of inequality, discrimination, policing, political exclusion, etc., all faced by the Black community in our city. And we'll be using some class readings, primary sources from that time, some sources from today in the present, and contemporary articles about police violence. And we will argue that the same structural issues that existed back then in Newark continue to affect us today. Some historical context before 1967, I'll be talking about two articles in-class articles. Firstly, about Robert Curven's Inside Newark article, Chapter 4 of Decline, Rebellion, and the Search for Transformation, taken from the Rutgers Press. And he talks about how Newark's Black population faced severe inequality long before 1967, and how African Americans made up a growing majority of the city's population, and how political power remained largely in the hands of white folks who were in charge or white officials. Um, and this discrimination included housing discrimination, unemployment, underfunded public services for the Black community, which was a common experience, and also how policing was one of the most visible symbols of inequality back then. And the police force was overwhelmingly white and had a long history of aggressive and violent interactions with the Black community of Newark. And by the mid 1960s, there were high tensions between the community and the police, and it pretty much had reached a breaking point. For the second in-class article I'll be talking about is taken from the Rutgers Collection interview of Mr. Lincoln Lawrence, and he primarily discussed the late 1960s, early 70s, particularly around the years of the 1967 Newark riots and the student activism here in Rutgers, Newark, a lot of it which took place on campus. And his story captures a major turning point in Newark's history, which showed how turmoil and activism pushed Rutgers Newark to open its doors to its community, becoming a place where education, equality, and one community began to come together and work together, and how also systematic barriers in Newark once made it almost impossible for Black and Latino students to get higher access to a better education. But his interview also shows how the people in the community refused to accept um, that they didn't have access to this power or this higher education. And so they organized, protested, demanded change, in which the community turned their frustration into action. And just to conclude, his story is very relevant today, and it reminds us that change can happen when your own thoughts are spoken aloud, um, especially if they are able to make a change, and that Newark's history of activism isn't just something of the past, it's a living example of how a collective community can take action and keep pushing our city and country towards justice.
Okay, the trigger of the Newark Rebellion happened on July 12th in 1967. On that night, a black taxi driver named John Smith was arrested and badly beaten by Newark police officers. At that time, situations like these were not rare in Newark. Many black residents already had a lot of negative experience with the police. There was a lot of fear, anger, and mistrust in the community. So when people started hearing rumors about John Smith might have died while he was on police custody, the reaction was very strong. People from the neighborhood went to the four precinct to ask questions and to protest what happened. At first, it was a small protest, but more and more people show up. Many residents were tired of being ignored and felt that this incident represented many years of injustice. Over the next few days, the protest turned into a widespread unrest across the city. The situation became very intense, and the National Guard was eventually called in. By the end of the rebellion, dozens of people had been killed, hundreds were injured, and many buildings were damaged. Government officials and the media described those events as a riot. However, many people who live in Newark saw it differently. From their point of view, this was not just violence, it was a reaction to years of police brutality, racial inequality, and the feeling that the system was never working for them. So, the primary sources that we use came from the Rise of Newark, source provided and recommended by our professor, that came with oral histories, photographs, and documents of the 1967 Newark Rebellion, and the rally leaflet where contains Newark State Archives. Those primary sources help us understand how Newark residents experienced the rebellion. Oral history collected by Rise Up Newark include testimonies from community members who describe daily harassment by police, econom- economic uh, economic hardship, and the sense that the rebellion was a moment of resistance rather than chaos. Rise Up Newark also preserved photographs and documents showing protests, National Guard presence, and community organizing during the rebellion. Those sources center the voices of residents who were often ignored by a mainstream media. This document called for mass protests against police brutality shows that the rebellions included organized political actions, not just spontaneous violence.
So connecting it back to our contemporary sources and focusing on the issues of Newark in 1967, a lot of it is, or the parallels are very different, such as in our most recent article, a blog from the Chicago Schools president on George Floyd. It argues how police violence was not a isolated problem, but part of a larger systematic issue. And similarly, in another article um, taken from the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation called The George Floyd 3 Years Later, The Work Remains, it pretty much emphasizes how racial injustice and police accountability remain unsolved problems in the United States. And a lot of the information, it talks about how, um, like I said, work still remains to be done, and there's a lot that needs to be done before we can move on. And just like the Newark residents in 1967 and how they protested police brutality and demanded justice, communities today, not only in Newark but across the United States, continue to mobilize by using social media, video evidence, and public protesting to demand change. And so we do have a much bigger platform that should be used and is being used to um, create justice.
Um, During this project, studying the Newark Rebellion shows that um, racial unrest does not happen randomly. It is the result of a long-term inequality, political exclusion, and police violence. I would say that the key takeaway is that the 1967 Newark Rebellion is essential for understanding modern movement for racial justice. By connecting historical primary sources, class readings, and contemporary discussions of police violence, we can clearly see that the struggle for accountability and equality is ongoing still. And here we will conclude the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.